If you like love stories with twists that change lives forever, subscribe and join me every week. That cold December night, as the rain pounded the windows of the skyscrapers, Marcus Wellington heard 5 words that would shake the foundations of his perfect world. Just for tonight, can you be my dad? Hello. Before continuing with this story, tell me in the comments, where are you listening to me from? I love imagining what country or city you're joining me from today. Now, let's get back to this story, which is about to open wounds from the past and perhaps also heal broken hearts. The rain fell like tears from the sky onto the streets of Manhattan, creating puddles that reflected the neon lights of the buildings. Marcus Wellington adjusted his black cashmere coat, the same one he had worn to so many important business meetings. On so many lonely nights walking through the city, he had conquered, but that had never managed to make him feel at home. It was almost midnight when he left his office on the 42nd floor of the Wellington Industries building. At 38, he was the youngest CEO in the history of the company he had built from the ground up. But that night, like every night for the past 10 years, he returned to an empty apartment where only the echo of his own footsteps awaited him. His Italian sneakers clicked against the wet asphalt as he walked toward his black Mercedes, parked on the side street. The cold December wind cut into his face, but Marcus barely felt it. He'd felt that inner cold for so long that the weather outside seemed irrelevant. That's when he saw her. A small figure moved through the shadows of the alley near where he'd left his car. At first, he thought it might be a homeless person seeking shelter, a common occurrence in that part of town. But as he got closer, his heart stopped. It was a little girl no more than 4 years old, wearing a pink coat that had seen better days and a small backpack she carried like it was her most precious possession. Her light brown hair was wet from the rain, plastered to her small face, which looked at him with eyes that seemed to hold all the sadness in the world. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. In all his years living in Manhattan, he'd seen it all, but never a little girl so young, alone on the street at that time of night. The little girl looked up at him, and Marcus felt something strange in his chest, as if an invisible hand were squeezing his heart. There was something about that look that felt unnervingly familiar. Though he couldn't quite explain what it was, she approached with timid steps, shuffling her feet slightly inside boots that were too big for her. When she was close enough, she raised her small face to his and, with a voice trembling with cold and emotion, asked him the question that would change everything forever. Just for tonight, can you be my dad? Marcus's world stopped. The city lights blurred. The noise of traffic became a distant murmur. And all that existed in that moment was that little girl with eyes too old for her age, asking him for something he didn't know if he could give. He slowly bent down to her level, studying her face with a mixture of concern and something deeper he couldn't quite place. The rain continued to fall on them both, but neither seemed to notice. "Where are your parents, little one?" Marcus asked, his voice softer than he'd used in years. The girl looked down, nervously playing with the zipper on her backpack. "My dad left and never came back," she murmured. "And my mom is really sick. She's at home coughing a lot and her chest hurts. I told her I was going to get help." Marcus felt something inside him break. "What's your mom's name?" "Clara," the girl replied, and Marcus felt like he had been punched in the stomach. Clara. A name she hadn't spoken out loud for 10 years. A name she buried deep within her memory, along with all the memories of what could have been, but never was. But it had to be a coincidence. Clara was a common name. It couldn't be the same Clara he'd known, loved, lost through his own stupidity and pride. "And what's your name?" he asked, trying to remain calm. "Sophia," the girl replied, a small smile lighting her face for a moment. "But everyone calls me Sophie." Marcus looked more closely at Sophie's face, and his heart began to beat faster. There was something about the way she frowned when she was thinking, something about the curve of her smile, something about the twinkle in her eyes that felt painfully familiar. "I have to take you back to your mom, Sophie," Marcus said, standing up and extending his hand to her. "But first, how about we go get something hot? You must be freezing." Sophie took his hand confidently, and Marcus was surprised at how natural the small gesture felt. It had been so long since he felt the need to protect someone, to care for someone other than himself. They walked together through the wet streets until they reached a small cafe that was open 24 hours a day. Marcus helped her sit at a table near the window and ordered hot chocolate and sandwiches for them both. While they waited for their food, Marcus watched Sophie intently, every gesture, every expression. Every small movement painfully reminded him of someone he'd tried to forget for a decade. "Tell me about your mom, Sophie," Marcus said softly. "Has she been sick for a long time?" Sophie nodded sadly, holding her cup of hot chocolate in both small hands. "Since we moved into the new house, it's very damp and cold, and Mom says it's bad for her lungs. She coughs all night and sometimes can't breathe properly." Marcus felt a tightness in his chest. "Why don't they go to the doctor?" Sophie looked down. "Mom says doctors cost a lot of money, and we don't have much. She used to work in a store, but she got sick and can't go anymore." The story Sophie told him was heartbreaking, but there was something else that troubled him. Every time he saw her smile, every time he saw her frown in concentration, every small gesture reminded him vividly of Clara, the only woman he had ever truly loved. Clara Martinez had been his college classmate, the woman who had filled his days with laughter and his nights with shared dreams. They had planned to get married after graduation, build a life together, perhaps have children. But Marcus, young and ambitious, had let his career become more important than his love. He had accepted a job offer in another city without consulting Clara, thinking she would simply follow him. When she refused to abandon her alien family, Marcus didn't understand. They fought, said hurtful things, and in a moment of wounded pride, Marcus told her that if she couldn't support his dreams, then they weren't meant to be together. Clara had cried that night, begging him to reconsider, but Marcus had already made his decision. He left the next morning without saying goodbye, convinced he was doing the right thing for their future. The years that followed were professionally successful. Marcus built his business empire, accumulated wealth and power, but he never loved anyone again as he had Clara. He had had relationships, of course, but none that filled the void left in his heart. Now, 10 years later, looking at this little girl who looked so much like Clara, it hurt. Marcus began to wonder if fate was playing a cruel joke on him. Sophie finished her hot chocolate and smiled, her cocoa-stained lips smirking. "Thank you very much, Marcus. I haven't had something this delicious in a long time." "You don't have to thank me for anything, Sophie," Marcus replied, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. "Now, can you take me to your house? I want to make sure you get there safely and check on your mom." Sophie nodded enthusiastically and took his hand again. They walked together along streets that became progressively more rundown, away from the elegant financial district where Marcus spent his days, into a part of the city he rarely visited. The streets were riddled with potholes, the buildings were old and neglected, and the smell of damp and neglect was almost palpable. Marcus felt uneasy, not out of prejudice, but from the realization that he had been living in a bubble of privilege, completely disconnected from the real struggles of people like Sophie and her mother. "We live there," Sophie pointed out, pointing toward a brick building that had seen better days decades ago. Marcus looked at the building with growing concern. The exterior walls were stained with moisture. Several windows had broken glass covered with cardboard, and the smell of mold was noticeable even from the street. They climbed a narrow, dimly lit staircase to the third floor. Sophie stopped in front of a peeling green-painted door and took a small key from her pocket. "Mommy, I'm home," Sophie shouted as she opened the door. "And I brought someone to meet you." Marcus followed Sophie into the small apartment, and what he saw filled him with both sadness and anger. It was a tiny space, with walls that clearly had moisture problems, old but clean furniture, and a musty smell that explained the respiratory problems Sophie had mentioned. But it was the voice that answered from the bedroom that made Marcus freeze completely. "Sophie, honey, where were you? I was worried." It was a voice Marcus had heard in his dreams for 10 years. A voice that had whispered his name in moments of love, that had cried his name in moments of pain, that had cursed his name the day he left. It was Clara's voice. Sophie ran into the bedroom, and Marcus followed her as if in a dream. The room was dark except for a small lamp on the nightstand, and in the bed, slowly sitting up, was the woman he had loved and lost a decade ago. Clara Martinez looked fragile, thinner than Marcus remembered, with deep dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. But she was still beautiful, still the woman who had captured his heart when they were 22. When Clara looked up and saw Marcus standing in her bedroom doorway, her face filled with shock, disbelief, and what looked like pain. Marcus murmured, his voice barely a whisper filled with emotion. For a moment, neither of them moved. 10 years of separation, of unanswered questions, of words never spoken, hung over them like a thick cloud. Sophie, oblivious to the tension in the air, ran to her mother's bed. "Mommy, this is Murdoch Marcus. He helped me when I was cold and bought me hot chocolate. I asked him if he could be my dad for the night, and he was very nice to me." Clara looked at her daughter, then at Marcus, and back at Sophie. Her eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back. "Sophie, love, can you go to the kitchen and get me a glass of water?" Clara asked her daughter, clearly needing a moment alone with Marcus. Sophie ran out of the room, and Clara and Marcus stared at each other in a silence that held years of pain, regret, and unresolved love. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" Clara asked, her voice shaking. Marcus approached the bed slowly, each step charged with emotion. "Your daughter, Sophie, asked me to be her father for one night. She was alone on the street, Clara, a 4-year-old girl alone in Manhattan at midnight." Clara closed her eyes, and tears began to fall down her cheeks. "I know. I fell asleep because of the cough medicine, and when I woke up, it was gone. I've been worried sick." Marcus sat carefully on the edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance, but feeling the overwhelming urge to move closer. "Clara, what happened? How did you come to live like this?" Clara took a deep breath, which turned into a dry cough that shook her for several seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with exhaustion and resignation. "After you left, it took me a long time to recover," Clara began, looking at her hands instead of Marcus's eyes. "I thought you'd come back, that you'd realize we'd made a mistake. But months passed, then a year, and I never heard from you." Marcus felt like every word was like a knife in his heart. He'd been so focused on building his career, so convinced he was doing the right thing, that he'd never stopped to think about the pain he'd caused Clara. "I met David 2 years later," Clara continued. "He was charming, attentive, and promised me the world. He said he loved me, that he wanted to take care of me forever. He convinced me to sell my parents' house and put all my savings into an investment he knew about." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "Did he rob you?" Clara nodded, the tears falling more abundantly now. "Not just the money. My heart, my self-confidence, too. When I got pregnant with Sophie, he got nervous. He said he wasn't ready to be a father, that he needed time to think. One morning I woke up and he was gone, taking all the remaining money and leaving me a note saying he couldn't handle the responsibility." Marcus clenched his fists, feeling a rage he'd never experienced before. The instinct to protect Clara, which had lain dormant for 10 years, reawakened with a force that surprised him. "Clara, please let me help you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "This place is making you sick, and Sophie shouldn't be living like this." Clara looked at him with a mixture of hurt pride and despair. "I don't need your pity, Marcus. I've made the mistake of depending on a man before." "It's not pity, Clara," Marcus replied, moving a little closer. I don't know what to call it. Guilt, responsibility, love that never left. If I hadn't been so stupid, so selfish 10 years ago, maybe none of this would have happened." Clara looked him straight in the eyes for the first time since entering the room. "You're not to blame for the decisions I made later, Marcus. I chose to trust David. I chose not to look for you when I got pregnant." Marcus felt his heart stop. "When did you get pregnant, Clara?" Clara blushed and looked away. "Sophie is 4 years old, Marcus. She was born exactly 2.5 years after we separated." Marcus did the math in his head, and a possibility that had been swirling in his mind since he'd seen Sophie began to take shape more clearly. The timing matched. The physical resemblance was undeniable. And now that he thought about it, David had appeared in Clara's life 2 years after their separation, but Sophie had been born 2.5 years later. "Clara, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly. Clara looked at him apprehensively, as if she knew what was coming. "Is Sophie my daughter?" The silence that followed was deafening. Clara closed her eyes, and more tears began to fall. Marcus waited, his heart beating so loudly he could hear it in his ears. Finally, Clara nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yes, Marcus, Sophie is your daughter." Marcus felt as if the world had come to a complete standstill. Everything he had built over the past 10 years, his entire carefully planned and controlled life, crumbled and was rebuilt in an instant. He had a daughter, a beautiful, intelligent, brave daughter who had lived for years without knowing him, who had grown up in poverty while he accumulated wealth, who had asked to have a father for one night without knowing that her real father was standing before her. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking with emotion. Clara wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Because you left, Marcus. You left telling me that if I couldn't support your dreams, we weren't meant to be together. What was I supposed to do? Call you and tell you I was pregnant after you made it abundantly clear you didn't want me in your life? Marcus raised his hands to his face, feeling the weight of 10 years of wrong decisions. But when David showed up, why did you let him believe she was his daughter? Clara sighed deeply. Because I thought Sophie deserved to have a father who wanted to be there. David seemed to love her, treated her like his own. I thought it was better for her to have a father present, even if it wasn't her biological one, than to grow up knowing her real father had abandoned us. Marcus felt each word like a physical blow, but he knew Clara was right. He was the one who had chosen to leave. He was the one who had put his career before his love. He was the one who had created this situation. At that moment, Sophie returned to the room with a glass of water and a bright smile. Here's your water, Mommy. Have you two met before? Clara and Marcus looked at each other, and Clara made a decision that would change everything forever. Yes, love, they knew each other. Marcus is Mr. Marcus is your dad. Sophie dropped the glass of water, which crashed to the floor, but none of the three of them moved to clean it up. The girl looked at Marcus with huge eyes, then at her mother, then back at Marcus. Really? Sophie asked, her voice filled with such pure hope that it broke Marcus's heart. Marcus approached Sophie and knelt in front of her, taking her small hands in his. Yes, Sophie, I'm your daddy, and I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner. Sophie stared at him for a long moment, studying his face as if memorizing every detail. Then, without warning, she threw herself into his arms and hugged him with a strength that didn't seem possible for someone so small. For the first time in 10 years, Marcus cried. He cried for all the moments he'd missed, for all the nights Sophie had gone to sleep without a father, for all the times Clara had fought alone, for all the love he'd squandered because of pride and ambition. Does this mean I don't have to ask strangers to be my dad for the night anymore? Sophie asked, her voice muffled against Marcus's chest. No, my love, Marcus replied, his voice cracking with emotion. You don't have to ask that of anyone ever again. For the next few hours, Marcus didn't move from the apartment. He helped Clara when another cough struck, made her tea, and watched Sophie fall asleep in his arms while he told her a story. When Sophie finally fell asleep in her small bed, Marcus and Clara talked all night. They talked about the past 10 years, about regrets, broken dreams, and lost hopes. They talked about Sophie, about her immediate medical needs, about the education she deserved, about the future they could build together. Clara, I have to tell you something, Marcus said as the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day in these 10 years. I built an empire, accumulated more money than I could ever spend, but I could never fill the void you left in my life. Clara looked at him with tears in her eyes. I couldn't forget you either, Marcus. Even when I was with David, a part of me always belonged to you. Marcus approached Clara and took her face in his hands. Let me fix this, Clara. Let me be the man I should have been 10 years ago. Let me be the father Sophie deserves and the partner you deserve. Clara closed her eyes, feeling Marcus's touch like water in the desert after years of emotional drought. How do I know you won't walk away again when things get tough? Because this time I understand what's truly important, Marcus replied. Because now I know that all the success in the world is worthless if you don't have the people you love to share it with. Because I have a daughter who needs me and a woman I should never have let go of. Clara opened her eyes and saw in Marcus's a determination and sincerity she hadn't seen 10 years ago. The Marcus who had left had been an ambitious but immature young man. The man standing before her now had been forged by pain, regret, and an understanding of what truly mattered in life. Okay, Clara whispered, but let's take it slow this time. Sophie and I have been through a lot, and she needs stability. Marcus nodded, completely understanding. Whatever you need, as long as you need. But in the meantime, let me get you out of here. This place is slowly killing you, and Sophie shouldn't be growing up breathing mold. Over the next few weeks, Marcus became a man on a mission. First, he found a beautiful apartment in a safe neighborhood with large windows that let in plenty of natural light and a ventilation system that would permanently eliminate the humidity problems that had plagued Clara's health. Afterward, he arranged the best medical consultations for Clara. The specialist confirmed that her breathing problems were completely treatable. With the right medication and a change of environment, within a few weeks, Clara was breathing better than she had in years. For Sophie, Marcus hired the best pediatricians to ensure she was completely healthy and enrolled his daughter in a private school where she could receive the education she deserved. But more importantly, Marcus spent every free moment learning how to be a father. He took Sophie to the park every day after work, read her bedtime stories, helped her with her preschool homework, and slowly began to understand the unconditional love that only a father can feel for his child. Clara watched this transformation with a mixture of joy and caution. It was clear that Marcus had changed, that his priorities had been completely reorganized by the discovery of his paternity. But a part of her still feared that it would be temporary, that eventually his ambition would win out, and he would abandon them again. Marcus seemed to understand her fears without her having to vocalize them. One night, while Sophie was sleeping and they were sitting on the couch in their new home, Marcus took Clara's hands in his. "I know you're afraid, Clara," he said softly, "and I understand why. I'm afraid too." "What are you afraid of?" Clara asked, surprised by his honesty. "I'm afraid of not being good enough for you," Marcus replied. "I'm afraid of making mistakes, of accidentally hurting Sophie, of not being able to make up for all the years we lost. But most of all, I'm afraid of losing you again." Clara felt her heart soften a little more. This vulnerability, this emotional honesty, was something the younger Marcus had never shown. "Marcus, you don't have to be perfect," Clara told him. "You just have to be here. That's all Sophie and I need." Marcus brought Clara's hands to his lips and kissed them softly. "I'll always be here. That's my promise to you." The following months were like a slow but beautiful awakening for the three of them. Marcus drastically reduced his work hours, delegating responsibilities at his company so he could spend more time with his new family. Clara began studying to become a teacher, a dream she had abandoned years before, but one that Marcus encouraged her to pursue again. Sophie flourished in her new school and home. Every day she seemed happier, more confident, more filled with the natural joy that children should have. And every day, she became more like Clara in personality and more like Marcus in some gestures and expressions. One spring afternoon, as Marcus pushed Sophie on a swing in the park near their house, Clara watched from a bench. The scene was perfect, her daughter laughing with pure joy as her father gave her a boost. Both of them completely absorbed in that simple but precious moment. "Higher, Daddy," Sophie shouted, and Marcus obediently pushed her a little harder. Clara felt tears welling up in her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude. She had spent so much time thinking that life had played a trick on her, that she had been punished for loving the wrong person at the wrong time. But now she understood that sometimes the universe has bigger plans that we can fathom. If Marcus hadn't left 10 years ago, if he hadn't gone through the experience of building his empire, only to realize it was empty without love, he might never have developed the emotional maturity he had now. He might never have learned the true value of family. And if Clara hadn't endured David's betrayal, the years of struggle as a single mother, she might never have developed the strength and independence that helped her survive and raise an extraordinary daughter. Their separate paths had been painful, but they had brought them back to each other as more complete, wiser people, more capable of loving deeply. That night, after Sophie went to sleep, Marcus and Clara sat on the balcony of their apartment, watching the city lights stretch to the horizon. "Clara, there's something I want to ask you," Marcus said, his voice nervous in a way Clara hadn't heard before. Clara looked at him curiously. "What is it?" Marcus stood up and knelt in front of her, taking a small velvet box out of his pocket. Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. 10 years ago, I was too young and stupid to understand what I had to do with you," Marcus began, his voice trembling slightly. "I let my pride and ambition take precedence over our love, and that decision cost me the best years of my life. It cost me watching our daughter grow up. It cost me being there for you when you needed me." Clara felt tears beginning to fall down her cheeks as Marcus opened the box, revealing a beautiful yet simple ring, exactly the style she would have chosen. "I can't change the past, Clara, but I can promise you the future. I can promise you that I'll never again allow anything to be more important than the two of you. I can promise you that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve, the father Sophie needs, and the partner I should always have been for you. Clara Martinez, will you marry me?" Clara looked at the ring, then into Marcus's eyes, where she saw not only love, but also determination, maturity, and a deep understanding of what true commitment meant. This wasn't the impulsive young man who had left her years before. This was a man who had learned that true love requires sacrifice, presence, and a willingness to put family above all else. Yes, Marcus, Clara whispered, extending her trembling hand. Yes, I will marry you. Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that were also shaking with emotion, then took her in his arms and kissed her with a passion that contained 10 years of longing, regret, and renewed love. When they parted, they both had tears in their eyes and smiles that seemed to light up the entire city. Dad, Mom. They both turned around to find Sophie standing in the balcony doorway, wearing her princess pajamas and her hair tousled from sleep. Sophie, what are you doing awake, love? Clara asked, quickly wiping away her tears. Sophie ran over to them and climbed into Marcus's lap with the familiarity she developed over the past few months. I heard them talking and wanted to know if everything was okay. Marcus looked at Clara, who nodded with a smile. Everything's perfect, Sophie. In fact, we have something very special to tell you. Sophie looked at them curiously, noticing the ring on her mother's finger. What is it? Your mom and I are getting married, Marcus told her, carefully observing his daughter's reaction. Sophie's eyes lit up like stars. Does that mean we're going to be a real family forever? Clara felt her heart break a little at her daughter's question. Sophie had longed for a complete family so much that the thought of finally having one filled her with pure, uncontainable joy. Yes, my love, Clara replied. We're going to be a real family forever. Sophie hugged Marcus and then Clara, and then tried to hug them both at the same time. And I'll never have to ask anyone to be my dad for the night again, right? Marcus felt his throat close with emotion. Never again, Sophie. I'm going to be your dad every day, forever. The wedding took place 3 months later in the garden of a mansion Marcus had purchased on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't an ostentatious ceremony, but rather an intimate celebration with the closest friends and family they had managed to gather. After so many years, Sophie was the bridesmaid, wearing a pink dress she had chosen herself and a flower crown Marcus had made for her that morning. Throughout the ceremony, she never stopped smiling, as if she had finally found where she belonged. When the officiant asked them to exchange personal vows, Marcus took Clara's hands and spoke from his heart. Clara, for 10 years I lived in a world I had built with my own hands, but it was completely empty because you weren't in it. I thought success was measured in money, power, and recognition. But one rainy night, our daughter taught me that true success is measured in love, in presence, in the ability to make the people you love feel safe and valued. I promise you I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you I've learned that lesson. I promise I'll never let anything be more important than our family again. I promise I'll love Sophie as the daughter she is, and I promise you as the extraordinary woman you always have been and always will be. Clara struggled to maintain her composure as she responded. Marcus, you broke my heart 10 years ago, but time and circumstance have shown us that some loves are stronger than pain, more enduring than time, and more important than pride. I forgive you for the past, and I choose you for the future. I promise you that I will build this new life with you with the wisdom we have gained through suffering and the joy we have found in being together again. When they kissed to seal their vows, Sophie clapped so loudly that the entire congregation burst out laughing and started clapping too. The reception was cheerful and full of laughter. Marcus had hired a band that played all of Clara's favorite songs, and he spent most of the night dancing with his new wife and daughter. But the most emotional moment came towards the end of the night, when Sophie approached the microphone that had been used for the toast and asked to speak. The 5-year-old, dressed in her pink outfit and with her flower crown a little askew after hours of dancing, held the microphone with both hands and spoke with the seriousness that only children can have when something is truly important to them. I want to say something, Sophie announced, and the entire reception fell silent to listen to her. A long time ago, when Mommy was sick and we lived in the damp house, I was afraid every night. I was afraid Mommy would get sicker. I was afraid we wouldn't have enough food. I was afraid no one would take care of us. Clara felt tears well up in her eyes, remembering those terrible nights when Sophie was so young but seemed to intuitively understand that they were in a precarious situation. One night I went out looking for help, Sophie continued, and I asked a stranger to be my dad just for that night. But he wasn't a stranger. He was my real dad, and I didn't know it. Marcus approached Sophie and knelt beside her, putting his arm around her for support. Now, I'm not afraid at night anymore, Sophie said, her voice clear and strong, because I have my mommy, who is the bravest person in the world, and I have my daddy, who watches over us and loves us. And I'll never have to ask anyone to be my daddy for just one night again, because I now have a daddy forever. There wasn't a dry eye at the entire reception. The guests, many of whom didn't know the full story behind how Marcus, Clara, and Sophie met, were deeply moved by the girl's heartfelt words. Marcus took the microphone from Sophie and spoke in an excited voice. "Sophie, you are the bravest little girl I know. And you're right. It's not just for one night anymore. I'm your dad for life now, and that's the best promotion I've ever received." The years that followed were the happiest any of the three had ever known. Marcus had found the perfect balance between his work and his family, building a schedule that allowed him to be present for all the important moments in Sophie's life. He attended every school play, every soccer game, and every parent-teacher conference. He helped with homework, taught Sophie how to ride a bike, and developed a father-daughter relationship so strong it seemed they'd been together. Since day one of Sophie's life, Clara flourished as well. With Marcus's support, she completed her teaching degree and began working at an elementary school, where she became a favorite with all the students. Having a profession she loved and a supportive family restored the self-confidence she had lost. During the difficult years, Marcus, for his part, discovered that being a father and husband hadn't limited his professional success, but rather enriched it. The perspective and peace of mind he gained from having a solid family life translated into better business decisions and stronger relationships with his employees and partners. His company continued to grow, but now Marcus led with a more humane style, more aware that behind every employee was a family that depended on them. He implemented more flexible work policies, improved health benefits, and support programs for working parents. When Sophie turned 8, Marcus and Clara decided it was time to expand their family. Clara's pregnancy was carefully monitored due to her age and medical history, but everything went perfectly. Michael Wellington was born on a sunny April morning with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Sophie was absolutely fascinated with her younger brother and became the most protective big sister in the world. Marcus couldn't believe the difference between experiencing Michael's birth versus having missed Sophie's early years. Being present for every moment, from Clara's first kicks in her belly to Michael's first steps, gave him a whole new perspective on what he'd lost and how lucky he was to have a second chance. One evening, when Michael was 6 months old and Sophie 10 years old, the family was having dinner in their warm, light-filled kitchen. Sophie was telling them about her day at school. Michael was in his high chair playing with his food, and Clara and Marcus were looking at each other across the table with that silent communication that couples who have been through a lot together develop. "Dad," Sophie said suddenly, interrupting her own story about her art class. "Yes, love," Marcus replied, giving her his full attention. "Do you remember the first night we met, when I asked you to be my dad just for that night?" Marcus smiled, touched by the fact that Sophie so clearly remembered that night that had changed all their lives. "Of course I remember, Sophie. It was the most important night of my life." "I remember too," Sophie said thoughtfully. "I was so scared that night, but something inside me told me I could trust you, even before I knew you were really my dad." Clara looked at Marcus with eyes full of love and gratitude. "Sometimes the heart knows things the mind doesn't yet understand," she told Sophie. Sophie nodded solemnly, as if she fully understood that profound truth. And then she smiled that brilliant smile she had inherited from her mother. "Now, I'm so happy that that night happened exactly the way it did, because if it hadn't, we might never have been a family." Marcus stood up from his chair and hugged Sophie, once again feeling that overwhelming gratitude for the turn his life had taken. "You're right, Sophie. Sometimes the best things happen when we least expect them." That night, after the children were asleep, Marcus and Clara sat in their living room. The lights dimmed, the soft sound of Michael's breathing coming through the baby monitor. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked suddenly. "What about?" Marcus replied, surprised by the question. "Of having traded your entire life for us. Your elegant bachelor pad, your late nights at work, your total freedom." Marcus turned to look Clara straight in the eyes. "Clara, before I found you again, I wasn't living. I was existing. I was accumulating things, building an empire, but inside I was completely empty. What I have now, this life we built together, is worth more than everything I had before combined." Clara smiled and snuggled closer to him on the couch. "Sometimes I still can't believe everything worked out so well. After all those years of pain and separation." Marcus hugged her tighter. "I think we had to go through all of that to be able to appreciate what we have now." If we had married at 22, maybe I would never have matured enough to be the husband and father you needed, and you might never have developed the strength and independence that make you so extraordinary." Clara thought about that for a moment. It's true. The difficult years taught me that I can survive anything, and that self-confidence makes our marriage more of a choice than a necessity. "Exactly," Marcus replied. "We're together now because we want to be together, not because we're afraid of being alone." They were silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them to this point. Marcus broke the silence. "Do you know what surprises me most about all this? That Sophie has so much emotional wisdom at her age. That night, when she asked me to be her dad for a night, she wasn't just asking for help. In a way, she was inviting us all to become who we were meant to be." Clara nodded, thinking of her extraordinary daughter. Sophie has always had that special intuition about people. Even when she was very young, she seemed to understand things other children didn't. I think growing up in difficult circumstances made her more sensitive to the emotions and needs of others, Marcus reflected. But I also think she simply has a special heart. Months passed, turning into years, and the Wellington family continued to grow in love and unity. Sophie became an excellent student, participated in the school choir, and developed a passion for helping other children going through difficult times. When Sophie was 12, she asked Marcus if they could start a foundation to help single-parent families in crisis situations. Marcus was so impressed by his daughter's compassion and maturity that he immediately began working to make her vision a reality. The Sophie Foundation became one of the city's most respected charities, providing temporary housing, medical care, and educational support to families in similar situations to those Sophie and Clara had faced years earlier. Clara became the foundation's educational director, using her experience as a teacher and single mother to develop programs that truly addressed the needs of families in crisis. Marcus, meanwhile, had completely transformed his approach to business. His company had become one of the most ethical and socially responsible in the industry, known for both its financial success and its commitment to the well-being of its employees and the community. One afternoon, when Sophie was 14 and Michael was 6, the family was at the park where Marcus had first taken Sophie all those years ago. Sophie was pushing Michael on the same swing set Marcus had pushed her on when she was little. Marcus watched the scene from the same bench where Clara had wept tears of gratitude years before, and he felt that his life had reached a fullness he had never thought possible. Clara sat down next to him and followed his gaze to her children. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus smiled. "I'm thinking about how a simple question from a little girl can completely change the course of 3 lives." Clara took his hand. "You mean when Sophie asked you if you could be her dad for a night?" "Yes, but I'm also thinking about something else. I'm thinking that maybe Sophie wasn't really asking me to be her father for one night. Maybe she was asking if I had the courage to become the man I needed to be her father forever." Clara squeezed his hand. "And you had it." "Not immediately," Marcus admitted. "But yes, I eventually found that courage. Or maybe Sophie and you helped me find it." At that moment, Sophie ran up to them, holding Michael's hand. "Mom, Dad, Michael wants me to tell him the story of how we became a family. Can you help me?" Marcus and Clara looked at each other and smiled. It was a story they had told many times over the years, but one they never tired of because each time they shared it, they realized how miraculous their reunion had been. Clara took Michael onto her lap while Sophie sat between her parents. "Where do you want to start, love?" "It starts on a rainy night," Sophie said. "As always, that's the best part." Marcus began to tell the story as he had done so many times before. "It was a very cold and rainy night, and I was walking to my car after working very late." As Marcus told the story, Clara watched her children's faces. Michael, who had heard this story dozens of times, remained fascinated by every detail. And Sophie, now a mature teenager, still thrilled to hear about that night that had changed their lives. When Marcus got to the part where Sophie had asked him her fateful question, Michael interrupted. "And you really didn't know Sophie was your daughter?" "No," Marcus replied. "I had no idea. But there was something about her that seemed familiar, something that made me feel I had to help her." Sophie smiled. "It was my special intuition. I knew I could trust you, even before I knew who you really were." Clara continued the story from the perspective of that night, describing her shock at seeing Marcus standing in her bedroom doorway, the conflicting feelings of grief and hope she had experienced. By the time they reached the end of the story, the part about Michael's wedding and birth, The sun had begun to set behind the trees in the park, and that's where the story ends, Sophie concluded. But not really, because we're living a happy ending every day. Michael frowned thoughtfully. But Sophie, what would have happened if Dad hadn't been on that street that night? Sophie considered the question seriously. I think somehow we would have found each other eventually. Some people are just meant to be together, no matter how long it takes. Marcus looked at his daughter with admiration. At 14, Sophie had a wisdom about love and destiny that took most people decades to develop. You're right, Sophie, Marcus said. I believe true love always finds a way to bring together people who are meant to be together. As they walked home in the golden sunset, Michael running ahead and Sophie walking between her parents, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey that had led them to this moment. He had begun his adult life believing that success was measured by professional achievements and wealth accumulation. He had pursued those goals with singular determination, sacrificing love and relationships in the process. But one rainy night, a little girl with wise eyes and a brave heart had taught him that true success was measured in love, in presence, in the ability to make the people you love feel safe and valued. Sophie had asked a simple question, "Can you be my dad for tonight?" But within that question lay a deeper invitation. Do you have the courage to become the man you need to be to love and be loved fully? Marcus had accepted that invitation, and in the process, he had found not only his daughter, his lost love, but also his true self. The man he was now, the father and husband he had become, was who he had always been destined to be. He had only needed one brave little girl to show him the way. That night, as he put Michael to bed and said good night to Sophie, Marcus paused in the doorway of his daughter's room. "Sophie, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Dad." "Do you ever regret asking me that night if I could be your dad?" Sophie looked at him in surprised regret. "Dad, that was the best question I've ever asked. Not only because I got myself an amazing dad, but because I think I helped you find your true home." Marcus felt tears well up in his eyes. "You did it, Sophie. You definitely did." As he headed toward his bedroom, where Clara was waiting for him reading a book, Marcus thought about how different his nights were now compared to those lonely nights of 10 years ago. He no longer returned to an empty apartment after long hours at work. Now he returned to a home filled with life, love, joyful noise, and meaningful conversations. He returned to a wife who knew him completely and loved him unconditionally, and 2 children who filled him with purpose and joy. Clara looked up when she entered the room. "Is everything okay with the children?" "Everything's perfect," Marcus replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I was just thinking how lucky I am." Clara marked her place in the book and set it aside. "We're all lucky, Marcus, but we also work hard to build this life together. Love alone isn't enough. It requires commitment and daily effort." Marcus nodded. "You're right. But it all started with love. It all started with Sophie having the courage to ask for what she needed and me having the courage to respond." They lay down together in the bed they had shared for years, in the room that had witnessed so many important conversations, so many intimate moments, so many nights of simple domestic bliss. "Marcus, do you know what my favorite part of our whole story is?" Clara asked in the darkness. "Which?" "The ending. Not because it's perfect, but because it continues to be written every day. Every morning we wake up together, every family dinner, every time Sophie helps Michael with his homework, every time we look at each other and still feel that love that survived 10 years of separation. Those are the true happy endings." Marcus hugged her tighter. "You're right. And the best part is, our happy ending isn't a destination. It's a journey we choose to take together every day." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the soft sounds of their home at night, the heating system running quietly, Michael talking in his sleep in his room, Sophie turning pages as she read before bed. They were the sounds of a full life, of a family that had found its way back to each other against all odds. Years later, when Sophie graduated from high school as valedictorian of her class, she gave a speech that moved the entire audience. She spoke about the importance of asking the tough questions, having the courage to ask for help when you need it, and believing that second chances are possible for everyone. She didn't specifically mention her own story, but Marcus and Clara knew she was speaking from personal experience. She was sharing the lesson she learned that rainy night as a 4-year-old, who had the courage to approach a stranger and ask him to be her father for the night. After the ceremony, when they were celebrating at home with a small family party, Sophie approached Marcus with a serious expression. "Dad, there's something I've always wanted to tell you, but I never found the right time." Marcus left his conversation with Clara and gave his full attention to Sophie. "What is it, love? I want to thank you for saying yes that night. Not only for helping me, but for having the courage to change your life completely for us. I know it wasn't easy, and I know you sacrificed a lot." Marcus felt his throat close. "Sophie, you don't understand. I didn't sacrifice anything. I found everything. Before that night, I wasn't really living. I was just existing. You gave me a reason to truly live." Sophie smiled, that smile she'd inherited from Clara, which still lit up any room she entered. "Well, then I guess it was a fair trade. I gave you a family, and you gave me a home." Marcus hugged her, once again feeling that overwhelming gratitude for the unexpected turn his life had taken. In that hug, he could feel the little girl Sophie had been, but also the strong young woman she had become. Sophie broke away from the hug and looked him straight in the eyes. "It's not just for tonight anymore, Dad. You're my dad forever now, and that's exactly how it should be." And so, after all the years, all the struggles, all the tears, and all the joy, Marcus finally understood the deepest truth of his story. True love doesn't always come when we expect it or desperately seek it. Sometimes it comes disguised as crises, as moments of extreme vulnerability, as simple questions asked by brave children on cold, rainy nights. But when true love finally arrives, when we are finally ready to receive it with an open heart and the courage to change, it has the power to transform not only our lives, but also the lives of all the people we love. Sophie had asked the question that night, "Can you be my dad for tonight?" But Marcus's answer had been far deeper than a simple yes. It had been a lifelong commitment, a complete transformation, a decision to choose love over ambition, family over loneliness, presence over empty success. And now, years later, as he watched his daughter graduate, his son grow strong and happy, and his wife thrive in her career and personal life, Marcus knew that Sophie's question hadn't just been a plea for help. It had been an invitation to love, a chance to become the best version of himself, a chance to write a story of redemption that would prove it's never too late to find your way home. And so, on that perfect evening surrounded by his family, Marcus finally understood that Sophie's question had changed more than their lives. It had changed his understanding of what it means to be truly successful, truly happy, truly whole. If this story touched you deeply, tell me in the comments, what country are you listening from? What part of this story touched you the most? Like if you believe we all deserve a second chance at love, share this story with someone who needs reminding that there's always hope. And subscribe for more stories that touch your soul. If you made it to the end, leave in the comments what you like most about this story, or if you relate in any way to it. I'd love to know.